This is the Horse Radio Network.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Wood.
And I'm Jennifer Connor from Equestrian Businesswomen, and you are listening to Equestrian B2B, the podcast that brings together industry leaders, entrepreneurs, and equestrians for conversations about how they build and sustain a successful business.
On today's show, we discuss how to stand out as a quality interviewee, how and what to negotiate, what to look for in quality employee candidates, why networking is important, and more.
Our guest is Holly White, the human resource specialist dedicated to career development and mobility with the United Nations Population Fund, based in New York City, and who was raised on a standardbred breeding farm and competes in the adult jumpers. Hang around until the end of the show for some bonus content about how Holly found a way to ride horses in Africa.
Equitana USA, the world's premier equine expo celebration, is coming to the Kentucky Horse Park October 1st to the 3rd, 2021. If you're looking to shop for you and your horse and learn from top professionals like Laura Graves, Danny Waldman, and Jim Masterson for 3 full days, and then enjoy a spectacular evening show, this is the place to be. All Equestrian B2B podcast listeners get $10 off tickets now through July 31st with code EQB10. Get yours today at www.equitanausa.com. See you there.
Hi, Holly. It's great to have you on.
Thanks, Jen. It's great to be here.
So we're glad to have you here today to kind of talk about your job, what you do, some of the interview processes, because one of the most important things in business is getting good employees.
Very true.
Yeah. And I'd love to hear, your thoughts on the process of, what you look for as an employer in an employee during an interview or potential employee. And, also tips for those who are interviewing, like how can you best present yourself to an employer? And I think it would be great to, preface that with a little bit of your background and why you're an expert on these topics. And I read your bio and was extremely impressed and wanted to know more about how you got into the United Nations Population Fund and what your work there entails.
Okay, great. Well, I'll start with a little bit about my background. So I am a human resources professional. I've been working in the field for more than 20 years, probably dating myself a little bit, but not too specific, but I have a lot of experience. I did work in the private sector. So for some big companies like M&M Mars, Kraft Foods, Philip Morris for about 10 years, which was great training for me as an HR professional to sort of understand how businesses work. In 2008, sadly, I was affected by the financial crisis. I lost my job and I was looking for more meaningful work, not necessarily targeting the United Nations, but I happened to be out to dinner with a girlfriend that I went to undergrad with. And she works for the United Nations, and there were some people there that worked for one of the UN agencies, because keep in mind, the UN is a huge organization. There's the UN organization that hosts the General Assembly every September, but then there's a number of mandate-driven organizations that are called funds and programs, like UNICEF, which is focused on children under age 5. I'm currently working for the agency that's focused on ending maternal mortality, ending harmful practices like early marriage and female genital mutilation, and then also supporting life-saving commodities, so supply chain to the emerging markets, basically. So those are mandate-driven organizations, and that's where I'm working now. So I wasn't necessarily targeting the UN, but I wanted to do something more meaningful, because when I think about human resources, it's about people delivering great results for an organization, and the UN is supposed to be making the world a better place. So I guess the key nugget there is networking is really important when you're looking for work. And interestingly, I got to UNICEF through a horse connection. So even though
Wow.
My mom, a friend of my mother's said, "Oh, I know this woman. She works for UNICEF and she rides horses too." And so I literally just sent her an email and said, "Hey, I ride horses and I've been consulting with the United Nations Development Program. Would you like to have lunch?" And so we had lunch for probably, randomly for about a 12-month period. And then an opportunity came up at UNICEF and she recommended me. Of course, I had to go through the interview process, but I ended up getting selected. So it's always important. And I think the other key is networking is important. And it's not only sort of in business context, like you might be, a horse connection might give you a job opportunity. You might be at the gym and other places. And then it's important to sort of make your interest known, if you will, send it out to the universe so that people know that you're looking. Yeah. And then things actually, come back to you.
And what drew you to wanting to work in HR?
I sort of fell into that. So, of course, as every horse-obsessed girl, I thought I was going to go to vet school. I went to Cornell undergrad, and I would say, I wasn't the best science student. So I knew getting into vet school in the U.S. was going to be difficult. And I, at the time, was not, I think looking back, I probably wish I would have gone to vet school and pursued it elsewhere. I could have gone to Europe or the Caribbean. But at the time, it was something that I was not willing to do. And so I sort of fell into HR, to be honest. I had a temp job that my sister had gotten me, and I was working at Philip Morris as a temp in human resources, and I was studying. Actually, thought I was going to become a teacher, mainly because I would have the summers off to ride my horse. But then when I was working in, for Philip Morris and human resources, I really enjoyed what I was doing. And in fact, through networking, they referred my resume to Kraft Foods, which was one of the operating companies of Philip Morris, and I did my summer internship. I ended up switching to business school, and I ended up doing an internship with Kraft and then working for them full time for 6 years. So I think, the message there is you start out with a plan, but sometimes as experiences come along, you sort of, then you need to regroup a little bit and maybe make some different decisions.
So in your job right now, you do a lot of hiring, right? Because I know recently you told me you had 15 positions that you were looking to fill. Were they positions that you were looking for a specific type of person for, or did you have to kind of put together different people and different positions? How does that work?
So right now I'm responsible. I have done a lot of recruiting in my experience. And right now I'm responsible for recruiting what we call our leadership positions. So we operate in 130 country offices. And the country representative and the deputy representative and the operations manager are all positions that I'm responsible for recruiting for. So we did have a number of openings because also we have different rotational periods. So we kind of move people from country to country, and we did a rotation exercise, and there were about 15 positions that were not filled after the rotation exercise. So we had to go through the process of recruiting. And so for these positions, since they are country leadership positions, we are looking for people who are good people managers, people who, because of our sensitive mandate, because we are an organization that is focused on a woman's right to choose when and how many children she'll have. So that concept of women's empowerment, and a woman choosing what she wants to do with her body is a challenging sort of conversation to have with certain groups. And so we need managers to have these very difficult conversations with government to actually advocate for our mandate. So it's the communication and advocacy for a sensitive mandate is really important. We also need to mobilize resources. Because we are under the funds and programs of the United Nations, we actually mobilize all of the resources that we need to deliver our program. So they need to talk to donors and foundations to actually get these organizations to invest in our agency. And then delivering results. Like you need to be able to make sure you're getting things done for your beneficiaries or your clients in the private sector, their stakeholders, so this is something that we're looking for. So good people managers, communicators, being able to advocate for a sensitive mandate, mobilize resources, and deliver results.
I was just thinking, the first couple that you listed there, I think are qualities that kind of are across the board when you're looking to fill a position, no matter what the job description is, right?
I totally agree. And I think it's one of these things where people always tell me like, oh, I'm preparing for an interview. What should I prepare for? And I say, you know what? When you think about a manager, they want people who can work on a team, work with others. You need somebody who can communicate, right? And verbally, written, get stuff done. You need to deliver results. And then there might be some area of expertise or specialty. Like you need to, depending on, like if you're interviewing for a finance specialist, you need to have your technical skills down, right? So that technical side. But on the sort of people side of things, I always say communications, working with others, delivering results is really important.
Do you think women have to prepare differently than men for interviews?
It's a really good question. I mean, when I personally, no, they should not have to prepare differently, right?
Right.
But reality is, I mean, I think one of the things I've known with women is that when they're applying for jobs, like they feel like they need to be 150% qualified for a job to apply for it. Whereas a guy will look at it and say like, they've got half of the requirements down. Oh, I can do that job. So I always tell people that, women in particular, that one, they got to apply. If they think they can do that job or they're really interested in that job, you need to apply. Like that's step one, because guess what? You're not going to get the interview unless you apply. So, that's one thing that women need to do. I think personally, I don't want to say that women have to do things differently. I'm just going to basically say that when you are going to an interview, it's always, over prepare, and which I think women do naturally. So it's interviewing is a skill. So practice, and practice with your friend and record yourself. Like you could even just read questions off and just put out your iPhone and record yourself and hear your responses. How are you presenting yourself? Are you using filler words? Are you making eye contact? These are some things just to be prepared for. And I think women also, it's helpful to know who is on the interview panel, because it's always more knowledge is power. So like if you're going to be on an interview panel and there's going to be a finance person and maybe a marketing person and maybe an HR person, you can do some research to find out like, okay, where have they worked before? Maybe even, some social media is really powerful. You can kind of see what kind of posts they might be sharing. So like what's their background and interests. So therefore you can customize your responses a little bit more towards them. Most likely the finance person is going to ask you a question about data or finance. The marketers, communication, HR is going to be the team. So like, how can you think about experiences you've had and come up with examples of where you've demonstrated these really good examples of communication, delivering results, and working with others, for example. And then come up with really great questions at the end. A lot of times, I always say use all the time you have available when you're interfacing with a hiring team. So like in marketing, we call those communication touch points, right? So, at the end, you have a chance to actually ask some meaningful questions. And the smarter the questions you ask, it shows how motivated you are for the position. So if you've done some research, maybe you're working for a company that's gone through an acquisition, or maybe they've divested, or maybe they're doing a new strategy, or something's in the news about a new CEO. Ask questions about that, because it shows that you're really motivated because you've done your homework. And then at the end, I always say send a thank you note, because it's another chance for you to reiterate your interest in the position, another chance to demonstrate that you're motivated and that you really enjoy the conversation. You've taken the time to actually send that thank you note.
Yeah. And you're thoughtful about it, and you would care to be a part of that team.
Exactly.
So how would somebody find out who's on the panel, the interview panel? Would they call the HR department? How do they find that?
So typically the person who sends you the invitation or calls you up to say we have an interview, it's normally the HR person. I would ask that person and just say, would you mind sharing who's going to be on the interview panel? And by the way, also what type of interview it's going to be, because if you're interviewing for a consulting firm, for example, it might be a case study. So there's all the different types of interview. Maybe the HR person's going to have you set up like a phone screening type interview with another colleague. And also the other thing too is make sure the hiring manager is on the interview. If there's a panel, make sure that the person you're going to be working for is on the panel. And if the person's not on the panel, it's a bit of a red flag. Maybe there's a reason for it, but before you accept the job, you want to make sure you know who you're going to be working for, because if you look at staff engagement, like there's a strong correlation between the quality of your manager and how engaged you are. And so it's really important, because I always say you could be working for like the best company in the world, but if you've got the worst manager, your life is miserable. And just the exact opposite. You could work for the worst company, but have the best manager and your life is pretty good.
Right. Oh, that's a great tip. I would not have thought about that. And, I think people usually, or in my experience, interviews are one-on-one. It's not necessarily with a panel. And I think people would assume the person that they're interviewing with would be the person who, manages them. But that's not the case in a corporate structure.
Not always.
And actually, when I interviewed at Blue Chip, I had a panel of people that interviewed me. Like going for a farm job. Yeah. Going in for the farm job, the farm manager was there, the CFO, the office manager, the president was there. I mean, I knew the president, and that's how I got an interview. But there were like 4 or 5 people in the interview, which really took me back, because I had worked a little bit in the corporate world. But then when I was going to a farm, I was like, oh, it's a farm. It's a breeding farm. And I'm like, but I dressed and I brought a resume, and it was like the first time anybody had ever brought a resume to their interview at the farm. Funny. So yeah. So it was good. And I didn't even think about that though, that the person I was working for would actually be there. I mean, they were, but I didn't even question that,
I think that's another good point. When you do an in-person interview, always bring extra copies of your resume, because you assume that people have sent the resume around or they have it, because they technically should. The panel should have done their homework about whom they're interviewing, but that doesn't always happen. So always have extra copies, a pen, a piece of paper, etc. Just, be prepared.
Hi, I'm Piper Clem, publisher of the Plaid Horse magazine and host of the Plaidcast on Horse Radio Network. Do you have questions how price is determined in our industry and who is working in your best interests and the inner workings of how the equestrian community functions? What are your best choices with a limited budget? How do you expand your equestrian horizon? If any of these have been your questions over your time in this sport, check out theplaidhorse.com/college. I teach college credit classes at Clarkson University, where you can learn about the intuitive right decisions that can actually be wrong, norms and customs masking irrational decision-making, and business as usual looks very different under an economic microscope. Learn more at theplaidhorse.com/college. These are online asynchronous classes designed to work around your horse show schedule and open to everyone. Last semester, we had people ranging from age 13 to 60. So come join us, learn more at theplaidhorse.com/college, and learn to calculate the true value of an investment in this industry. Learn to play the game by making the most of your resources, and learn to think more productively, more creatively, and more rationally. This is a masterclass in understanding the incentives in the horse world.
And looking at it from the other direction, as an interviewer instead of an interviewee, what is something that interviewers should be asking of the people that they're the candidates that they're looking at?
So this is always a challenge, because there's a lot of people that are managers who sit on interview panels who are not skilled at asking questions. Because just as it's a skill for an interviewee to be really good at it, an interviewer needs to be good at it too. So the quality of your questions are really important. And there's a number of different types of interviews, and a lot of interview types are what they call a competency-based interview. And these are basically the situations of tell me about a time when you were faced with a conflict on a team. What were some of the steps you took to address it, and what was the outcome? So you ask like these situational questions, and they're looking for specific examples from the candidate. But a lot of times an interviewer is going to be asking what we call the marathon question. They'll ask, oh, tell me about the time when you had the conflict, and who was the conflict with? What steps did you take, and what was the outcome? And instead of actually just asking that first open-ended question and allowing the candidate to respond, and then asking a follow-up probing question to dig a little bit deeper to see, okay, well, how does this person address conflict? Are they a conflict seeker, avoider? What are some of the communication skills? How did they resolve it, et cetera? So an interviewer really needs to know specifically what are the requirements for this position, basically. There's the technical requirements and then the competency requirements, which is basically about how you get the work done. And then how do you come up with really meaningful questions to determine whether this person can do the job or not? And like I said, it should be like a good dialogue. It shouldn't be what I always call the sort of the rapid fire questions, because I always say, like, if you're at a cocktail party and someone comes up to you and asks you like 5 questions in a row, you're going to think that person's a little weird. So the same thing in an interview, like the interviewer has to ask an open-ended question. The person responds, you follow another question, etc. And the other thing I tell my interview panel members is that don't try to trick the candidate. Like there's something where, in the UN, like they don't want to tell the candidate what the competency we're looking for in the question. And I'm like, why are we trying to trick the person? We're trying to figure out, is this person going to be skilled, qualified to actually do the job? Are they going to fit in with the team? So we want to create a good environment for this person. You want to build some rapport. You want to make the person feel comfortable so that they can share with you what they know, and we can make a hiring decision. Because when you think about how expensive a hiring decision is, like in the UN system, we ship people off to different locations, and there's a very good relocation package, and plus you're paying a pretty good salary. And so someone did, this was like 10 years ago, an estimate of making a bad hiring decision for like an entry level manager in the UN. It was like a $250,000 mistake, Right. And so it's one of those things where you have to realize this is like an important decision to make. And as a hiring manager, you really need to come up with really meaningful questions that are going to help us gather enough data to determine whether this person can do the job or not. And that includes not just an interview, but we do sometimes a written assessment. So we might have them do a technical test. They do an interview, and then we check references and we check supervisory references. And I know this is difficult in the U.S. context, but we try to talk to people who have worked with this person just to get a better idea, another data point to consider when making a hiring decision.
Right. I think reference checks are extremely important, and being able to ask the right questions of those people as well, rather than just tell me what you like about this person. I want to know what the difficulties are there too if I'm hiring someone, and then I can decide, is this person worth that potential issue? That's what I've found in my
I always ask,
interview experience.
If you were given the chance to hire this person again, would you do it?
Yeah. That's I've gotten that a few times from reference checks of someone who said, like, I would totally work with them again. We would want them to come back or something like that. And I think that always gives you a great idea of the type of person that you're looking at. And in the corporate HR world, do you guys also deal with the kind of specifics when it comes to hiring as well? Once the interview is over, like putting together the right type of package and finding out, do you find that it's better to be, here's what we can give you, or do you talk to the person and find out what's important to them in terms of benefits and that sort of thing?
That is a very good question. And I will say I've been out of corporate HR for a while. So in the UN system, we have sort of like a standard package. But just in terms of like some of the recent developments, I think in how we're working with more remote work, for example, I think more people are looking for that option. And so it's kind of a positive because on one side, you could actually open up your talent pool to a broader, broader geography, because honestly, you don't have to be limited to people who are just like in your geographic area. You could, open it up much more broader. And I'm even wondering about work visas. Like if someone is working for a US company, but are based in India, like, do you have to worry about like a H-1B visa or whatever? So, but in any case, I know that, one of the things that, like when you're looking at compensation, first of all, it has to be total rewards. It's not just salary. It's your salary. It's your bonus. Is there a contribution? Is there a pension? Is there a match to your 401k? Do you have all these other benefits that are included? And I think it's important that you sort of like look at the total rewards, and that money is really important. But if you look at like when you're measuring money, they consider it a hygiene factor. There's a certain amount that you need to survive. But then once you go above that level, like you can't just throw money at people and think that you're going to make them happy. It's actually not the case. Like employers need to realize that there's other motivating factors that people work for an organization. So like the quality of your manager, the ability to develop yourself. So can I go to this organization and develop my skills? Do I have some autonomy over the work that I'm doing? Am I making a difference? So these are some things that are coming into play a little bit more in terms of, how can you be like what they call an employer of choice? And it's not just about money, it's about other factors. And I don't know exactly how corporations are doing it these days. When I worked in the private sector, we sort of had salary scales. And we would ask for your current salary, which now you're not allowed to ask for in New York State. But we'd ask for your current salary, and then we'd try to give you like a little bit of an incentive above that. But we also understood the total reward strategy. So we tried to understand like, okay, what is your current package? And then how can we, match it with what we're offering? And I think with women, at least I've, in the past, we earn 80 cents on the dollar, and it was, I was told, it's because we don't negotiate. But then there's been some additional research out there that says we actually do try to negotiate, but we're not as successful as men in getting a better salary, for example.
Interesting.
Yeah. So interesting data point. But I always say that, it doesn't hurt. When in doubt, ask, because you already have the offer. I mean, someone's not going to rescind your offer. Although I did have an example that this did happen to someone. And I said, well, you can probably take that person to court if you wanted to, because they, when they give you an offer, that is a legal document. They've given you an offer. And so you can accept it at that amount, or you can try to negotiate. So most organizations will not rescind the offer. And therefore, it doesn't hurt to ask, because honestly, if you do accept an offer and you lowballed yourself from a salary perspective, it's really difficult to make it up, because, there's sort of the promotion, which is a standard percentage increase. And the only way that you're actually going to get market rate for your salary is to go back and change companies, because a lot of internal organizations, sort of like their compensation doesn't necessarily keep up for market. In order to sort of get market rate, you do have to sort of change jobs. But then that affects your pension or your 401k and some of your tenure sort of elements. You need to make sure that you're making a job change for the right reason.
Yeah. Do you think there's a trend that people are looking for something specific now, like more than their salary? Like, are they starting to look for a work-life balance, or are they looking for other benefits? Is there one thing that you see people seem to be asking for or wanting?
I mean, I think that for sure with the new reality, people are definitely going to be wanting to work remotely, at least in a hybrid model. I think like not having to go into an office, I think is something that people, at least in the short term, are going to be really embracing. I think the younger generation definitely is embracing work-life balance. They're not someone who's like, I'm going to sell my soul to the devil and work hundreds of hours. They're like, no, you know what? I'm interested in my hobbies and my life. I'm not going to be sending emails on weekends. And I think also the other piece is the sort of working for companies who are have more of a purpose. There was a big push before the pandemic, which was really more focused on the sort of environment, sustainable. Like I think it was BlackRock came out with, like, their CEO was one of the first ones to come out and say that we're really going to be focused on more of these funds that are focused on environment, social responsibility, purpose. I forget what the sort of the moniker is. But of course, then I heard that, oh, well, these companies who say they're working on these green funds are actually investing in petrol companies.
Fossil fuel.
Yeah. There's a little bit of like an integrity issue there, but they're talking a good game. So I think younger people are looking for purpose and work-life balance for sure. And but also on that other piece is the ability to learn and grow and do something, like having a meaning in their job. I think it's
that fulfills you.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. And I think, it's funny, we talk about work-life balance and then we look at the equestrian industry and, how much we have to do that is not normal work hours. I mean, anybody who's been around a horse knows it's not a 9-to-5 Monday through Friday job. So I think for employers, especially upfront, is making it clear, like, okay, here are my expectations of you. And, you're going to be working these weekends or, there's going to be some late nights, but in return, the other weeks of the year, you can have that time off that you want. But, like you said earlier, communication is so important and being upfront about it.
And I like to think of work-life balance more like a pendulum versus a scale, because sometimes it does it. Sometimes it swings more towards your work and sometimes it's more life and sometimes it's right in the middle, right? But I think that if you look at it like a scale, it's always going to be skewed one way and then that's going to get you down.
Yeah. And you can't think like this is how it is all the time and it's never going to change. I think for me, I've accepted the January, February, March. I don't have days off. I work 7 days a week for 12 weeks straight. And then but I know that sets me up in order to have an easier summer. And I don't travel for 4 months for work. And I'm okay with that because there is that balance. I work really, really hard at the beginning of the year in order to have more time, especially when, I've got kids now and they're out of school in the summer. I do want to spend time with them in the summer as well. So it's, I like the pendulum idea.
Well, I mean, Holly, you and I both know from the breeding industry, right? It's like a mad sprint from January till June. And then, you get a little bit of a break and then it's selling yearlings, but at least when your break is coming, and for me with Decker right now, we have a huge December. Like it's a really big push in December because of AAEP and all the specials that we do and, trying to close out the year. So, I think it's good if you can find a point where you're like, oh, okay, I see the light at the end of the tunnel, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think I love the pendulum. Somebody else had mentioned like work-life harmony, right? Because it's like, how do you sort of sort of like harmonize it? Because it's true, it's never a scale. And I think, Jen, you had mentioned communication is important, and that means that you as an individual, when you're communicating to your manager, that you might have to be working these 7 days straight, but when you need some flexibility, you need to talk and say, listen, I need this time off or I need this. Mm-hmm. So there is that sort of two-way ability to sort of manage responsibilities so that you are still getting some things done during that really busy period. And the other thing is being able to sort of have a little bit of autonomy over your work, I think is really what people are seeking as well. It's like, if you're able to, it's like really focus on results. Like, what do you need to get done? And if it's something like right now I have a 7-month-old, I do like take a bit of like I work in the morning, I take the afternoon off, and then the baby goes to bed, and then I work at night. So it's sort of like, I'm getting the work done when I can get the work done. So just focus on, I'm getting it done by the deadline, but allow me some autonomy over like when I can get stuff done. Yeah.
The employers have to allow the autonomy, but the employees have to know that they have to fulfill their end of the bargain. If I'm giving an employee afternoons off, then I do expect you to get the work done however it gets done. Choose your hours, but make sure that everything's getting accomplished that we set out to do.
So to finish up, we have some rapid fire questions that we ask. So the first one is, what is one action that women can take to make a big difference in their lives?
I think be authentic and true to yourself. So know what you want and don't be afraid to go after it, because you deserve the best for yourself.
Great. And number 2 is, what is the best habit that keeps you motivated?
Keeping yourself, like getting enough sleep, drinking enough water, kind of like taking care of yourself health wise. I think, because one of the things is like, that's not something you can get back. So that sort of when you're taking care of those, your health and wellness, then you're able to sort of take care of challenges and things like that. So it's really important. I think probably sleep is the most important thing to me right now, probably because I'm not getting enough of it because I'm still breastfeeding. But
Totally.
The third question is, what is your favorite horse movie?
Oh, well, there's so many. I mean, I love like the Black Stallion, like movies and books. I love Seabiscuit. I thought that was actually really great. But probably the biggest tearjerker was the Far Lap movie. I don't know if you guys remember that old movie. So I know there wasn't one, but anyway.
We'll say Far Lap is your choice.
My favorite, yes, Far Lap.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Holly, for joining us today. It was really interesting to talk to you about your experiences, and I think your advice and your insight will be so helpful to all of our listeners.
Great. Well, thank you so much for the time. It was really, I enjoyed the conversation. So thank you again.
Since 1937, the Chronicle of the Horse has been the industry leader in coverage of national and international sport horse competition. Advertising in the Chronicle of the Horse magazine, its companion lifestyle publication Untacked, or their dynamic website, social media platforms, and e-newsletters will take your company's message to the largest English discipline competition equestrian audience in the United States. They've been ringside since 1937 and welcome your brand to join their community today. Visit them at koth.com, that's C-O-T-H, for chronicleofthehorse.com.
So I loved Holly and our conversation with her. I thought she brought up really interesting points that I hadn't thought of before. But I also loved how she talked about networking and how important it was to her and how it got her the job that she has now, and how horses and people she knew in the horse world helped her get an interview. Because obviously with equestrian businesswomen, networking is what we do and what we promote and what we try and foster. So I really loved her point about that.
Yeah, I think it was a really good point, because honestly, that's how I've gotten a lot of my jobs. I mean, even my job at DECRA, my friend worked for DECRA, and he was the one who kind of pushed my resume up the totem pole in order for me to get the job. So I really think that opening yourself up to network with people, as more people you know, the better off you are, because then you have reach, and you never know who's going to be able to help you, right?
Yeah. And I think, once you have those connections, and if it leads to an opportunity, she also talked about really advocating for yourself and asking for what you want and asking for what you think you're worth. So I thought that really will resonate with people, because so many times you think, and maybe it's, I don't know if it's a female mindset or if it's everyone, but if you apply for a job, you think, okay, this is what it is and this is what I'm going to get. And you don't think, oh, I could ask for more, or I could ask for it to be remote half the week or something like that. So I liked hearing, what they do for hiring practices and how people can incorporate that into what they ask for, but also what you offer employees.
Yeah. And I think that in my lifetime, I should have advocated for myself better in the beginning when I was negotiating salaries. But also there was a point in time where I left a job, and instead of communicating with them and saying, hey, I'm looking because I'm not happy about this and this. Can we change it? Can you help me move forward? Can you help me professionally and personally grow? I just left the job. And, I was intimidated to ask those questions and say, hey, I like my job, but this is what I need to stay, or I need help with and growing.
Absolutely. I was the same way. I'm like throughout my 20s. And I think it's harder. I think it's a lot harder when you're younger and you don't have that experience to back it up. But I think, once you're in a job and you've shown your value and what you contribute to the company, then you can come back to them and say, look, I need to have something more.
Yeah. And don't you think that sometimes women think that they're just supposed to give it to you, right? If you work really hard and you show what you do, you think that they're supposed to see that and give it to you. But that's not necessarily the case, because there's so many other pieces to the puzzle and so much else that's going on that people aren't just concentrating on you and what you're doing in your job. As long as you have the results, that's what they're looking for, right?
Yeah. Yeah, they're not always thinking about your personal fulfillment. So you've got to make it known. And communication was the other thing that Holly talked about. So those are some really important pieces to take forward from this.
Yeah, she's really a fun person, and she has a worldly knowledge that I really enjoy talking to her about and finding out more.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'm having so much fun doing these podcasts with you and learning and meeting new people. And I can't wait to keep talking and be able to share this with everyone.
Yeah, it's been amazing.
So I knew from you, Jen, Connor, about some of Holly's background and some interesting stories. So I wanted to know how she rode horses when she was based in Africa. And we have some really fun content for our listeners to listen to about how she did that. I thought it was really cool that you worked in Senegal. Maybe just a little slice of life story of your time there would be really cool, because I think, not a lot of people have had experience like that and what it's like there and to work and to live. And did you ride horses while you were there?
And I did actually. I mean, it's interesting because if you are working for the UN, I think from a career development perspective, the real work is being done in these more difficult locations. And actually, Dakar, Senegal, everyone called that Africa for beginners because it's still Africa, but it's still it's a pretty nice location. And in fact, I did ride horses, so Jen is familiar with my story about how it was kind of a little bit of a sad tragedy. So about 3 weeks after I left for Senegal, one of my horses had a pasture accident and died. So it was so I had a little bit of insurance money, and I wasn't planning on buying a horse, but I did buy a horse.
And in Senegal?
No, from France. And she imported him into Senegal.
I know.
What were the quarantine restrictions?
There are none.
There weren't any?
No, there's none to get them there. But
getting them home.
Getting out.
Yeah, getting him home. Yeah, he had to stay there.
Yeah.
Oh.
Because there's African horse sickness, and I could have tried to import him, but it was I'd have to, it was like a 30-day quarantine, and then he would have, if he tested positive for African horse sickness, then he'd either go back or be euthanized. He couldn't stay here, basically.
Wow.
So it was one of those things where, I mean, just the expense of it was just too much. But I did, call Connor up and say, hey, do you have any ideas for me?
At one point we were looking into shipping hay cubes over to her because he was not doing well on peanut leaves.
I know. That's what they eat, dried peanut leaves. And also I ended up importing food like his grain from France because he also is being challenged. They did have like local grain, but then of course, the quality of the grain that you're feeding is not the same. So, he's colicked a couple times. So that was a bit of a challenge. But, I will say, if I had to do it, I would not have bought a horse again. Like that was a bad idea. But I did actually ride. And I think that, having the opportunity to be able to ride and do something I love, even in that challenging context, actually kept me sane, if you will. Working in Senegal was definitely an interesting experience because I'd come from a more business background. And so being transitioned into what I would call more of a traditional, like African mindset. It's very focused on like your boss knows everything. Like you really can't make decisions on your own, was a little bit of a challenge for me. So the work was difficult, but I think from like an overall life experience of meeting people, living in, an environment that, you take, it's like almost like the things that you take for granted in the US, like when you turn your water on, like water comes out, I mean, when I was looking for an apartment, I had to make sure that there was a backup generator and that there was actually backup water because a lot of times water is cut off. And in fact, before I'd moved to Senegal, they had a water issue and there was no water for 30 days. And that some, like the American government was delivering water and like tanks to their employees, but like the UN really wasn't doing that. So I had to make sure that like there was a backup water source. Driving was a totally different animal. I'm like on dirt roads and like, driving, there's no road signs. That was another thing. Like, Connor knows I'm like perpetually late and perpetually lost. And so like, I'm like, what am I going to do? There's no road signs. There's no like, there's no addresses. I mean, it was really kind of an interesting experience, but I'm thankful that I had that exposure to life and work outside the US. And it also, and it showed me that I can still, I still was able to ride horses, believe it or not. It was wonderful. I made some great friends, traveled to some very interesting places. So.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And like you were saying before, how important networking is, I think experiences like that are so important too, to really round you out, no matter what kind of business you have. Those life experiences only add to what you can do and broaden your horizons. If you're looking to start a company and you've been somewhere and had to problem solve like that, it'll help you in the future in your business.
No, definitely. And I think the other sort of key learning about this experience, truth be told, I was hesitant about going because when I had applied for these jobs with the UNFPA, I wanted to go to Istanbul, which was a little bit closer to Europe and sort of like an assignment that I felt a little more comfortable with. So Dakar, actually having to operate in French, which even though I've studied French my whole life, my French is not as great as I want it to be. So that was like, these are big hurdles, but it's one of those things where you have to sort of stretch yourself and put yourself out of the comfort zone a little bit. Because if you are going to, take the plunge to start your own business, like you have to be ready to take some risks and, realize that it's not going to be easy. And, that network, but also support group, and
yes.
Connor knows I'm always like I use her a lot as a supportive friend. And that's something that you have to realize, that when you're trying to get things done, you don't try to do it all on your own. Know what's available to you in terms of resources, and don't feel like you have to climb the mountain alone, that there's people out there that can help you.
Find the links to today's guest and the show notes at www.eqbusinesswomen.com, out twice a month on the 1st and 15th.
You can have all 20 plus shows of the Horse Radio Network with you wherever you go with our free app for iPhone and Android. Go to your app store and search Horse Radio Network. You can follow us at eqbusinesswomen.com as well as on Facebook and Instagram. The show goes out to all podcast players. Wherever you get your podcast, you'll be able to get it over the next couple of weeks.
Now, go build your network.